Hello and welcome to this channel. My name is Dick van Oeveren and this is already the 12th video in this series of dynamic segmentation inside out. If you're interested in more videos in this series, please check out the playlist. In this video I will introduce the configuration of downloadable user roles. In the first 5 videos I've explained all the basics around dynamic segmentation and downloadable user roles, so let's cut to the chase and dive straight into the configuration. Here's the setup. From the previous videos, the switch has been configured for local user roles, but now I will configure the user roles on ClearPass and push those user roles to the switch. This will require some configuration on the switch, but not that much actually. So for the switches we have to configure the following. We have to make sure that the time is synchronized, and so this is required for the certificate. We also have to install the HTTPS certificate from ClearPass onto the switch. And we also need to add a ClearPass read-only administrator user account on the switch. And then finally enable the downloadable user roles function. And then for ClearPass the configuration is pretty straightforward. So we have to create the read-only administrator user that's used by the switch, create the downloadable user role profile that contains the relevant parameters for MAC authentication, 802.1x and captive portal, and create the policies and assign those, assign the appropriate downloadable user role profiles to those policies, and then finally create the services and assign the appropriate parameters and policies to those services. Now, same as in the local user role video, I will show you the configuration of MAC authentication, captive portal, and 802.1x. Let's start with the switch. The first step is to make sure that the time on the switch is in sync. So we're gonna configure NTP on this. So the first command that we have to use is the time sync command. So we have to set the time sync to NTP. NTP unicast. So I'm using unicast service. I also need to specify an NTP server, which is the NTP server here. I'm also going to specify iBurst. So iBurst is used to speed up the NTP synchronization. So when I enable iBurst, or when I assign iBurst to an NTP server, the switch will send out a burst of NTP requests within 1 minute. So that will be typically, I don't know, it's about 10 requests in a minute. And that speeds up the NTP synchronization process. And then the final command for NTP is to enable it. Okay, what I can do is I show NTP status. So probably not be synced at the moment, so I'll check it later on again, and then you can see that the times has been synchronized. Now next is to install the certificate from ClearPass. This is a very easy task. In the past this used to be a manual exercise where you had to use TFTP or SFTP to download the certificate onto the switch. And with the recent versions, well, at least with 1609, you can now download it straight away and directly from ClearPass. Now, before I do that, let me enable debugging and to see what happens when the certificate is installed. Let me just do a debug destination session and do a debug event. Okay. And before I download the certificate, let me just do a show NTP status again. And you can see that the NTP is synchronized now. Okay, so installing the certificate is done with the following command. It's radius server host 192.168.0.11, so that's the ClearPass server. And I have to specify that this is the ClearPass server. And now what you can see is in the event, in the debug event, you can see that the certificate is downloaded successfully. So that's good news. And then the next step is to configure the read-only admin identity. So that's done with the following command. service, that's CPPM identity. Let's call it dir admin. So that's the username, and let's give it a password. Okay. So I need this identity in order to be able to download the user roles from ClearPass. And then finally, what I have to do is I have to enable the downloadable user role functionality. And that's done with the following command: AAA authorization user role enable. So this command is just to enable user roles, so for local user roles. And if I add the download parameter to it, then also downloadable user roles are enabled. Okay, you can see that there are some messages here. So I need to have this ClearPass username, and I need to have the HTTPS root certificate installed, and that's done. So both requirements are satisfied. Now, because I have configured local user roles in an earlier video, there are some parameters that I don't have to configure with this scenario anymore because they are already configured. But I mean, they are needed for the downloadable user roles as well. So let me sum up what you have to configure if you would only do downloadable user roles. So what I'm doing is I'm going to do a show running config. And let me just show you the parts that you also need for the downloadable user roles. So these are all the policies and everything. Let's see. So we need to. You also need to configure the tunnel node server. Obviously, you also need the radius config, right? So that's pretty straightforward. Optionally, you can also configure accounting. Now again, these are all local user roles, so don't need to look at those. So that's your AAA authorization user role enabled download. And what you also have to configure, obviously, is your port access. So you need to activate your MAC authentication and your 802.1x functionality on the ports. And that's really it for for having downloadable user roles configured on the switch. Let's move to ClearPass. The first step is to create a read-only administrator, and that's the account that the switch can use to obtain the downloadable user roles. Let's add that one. And I will be assigning the read-only administrator privilege level to that account. And then next are the profiles. I will be creating 4 profiles. One for the camera, which is MAC authentication, one for 802.1x, and there are 2 profiles for the captive portal. So one redirect profile and one guest profile. So actually it's all very similar to the local user role configuration. So remember there was a 5th profile with the local user role, which is the port bounce profile. With the downloadable user roles, I can reuse that profile because this profile does not push any roles. It just bounces the port. Okay. Let me start with the camera user role. This is a downloadable role enforcement, and let's call it UBT downloadable user role camera. And the product is a switch. For the role configuration, you can see that there are 2 options. There's a standard and advanced option. With the standard option, you'll get a form that allows you to fill in all the relevant parameters using the GUI, and the advanced option allows you to create something like a CLI script. So this is more complex. And I will show an example of the advanced profile configuration later on in this video. But for now, we're going to stick with the standard configuration option. Okay. So next is the role configuration. So what I would like to do is I would like to push the same role information as I did with the local user roles. So this means that I need to create some classes and policies. And for the camera role, this would be allowing some traffic like DHCP, DNS, ICMP, IGMP, and TCP port 9000, which I've done with the local user roles. So let me create the classes and assign those classes to a policy. So the first step is to go to manage classes. I'm going to add a class name and I call this class name camera. And next is to add a rule. So for the camera class, I want to allow ICMP and TCP port 9000. So here's what I do is I have to give a sequence number, and for the protocol I can select ICMP, source and destination any, so that's fine, and then save that rule. And for the second rule, let's go up, I need to provide a sequence number again. Remember, I want to allow TCP port 9000, so my destination would be my source and destination would be any, and my destination port would be equal to 9000. Okay, save that rule and then save the class. So that class is now added successfully. Now I can add the second class, which is DHCP DNS. So and in this class I'm classifying DHCP and DNS traffic. So match protocol, so both DNS and DHCP is UDP traffic, allowing all any source, any destination, and my destination port would be equal to 67 for DHCP. Sorry, I need to add this sequence, important. And then add another rule, sequence 20, match protocol, UDP, source and destination any, and then the destination port equals 53 for DNS. And then save that class. And then I'm creating a third class, which is called IGMP. And I'm going to allow IGMP in this class. So this is particularly useful if you want to have ClearPass do some profiling. So IGMP is one of the protocols that is snooped by ClearPass. Oh yeah, and I have to add a number. Don't forget the number. Okay, and then add a final class, which is all traffic. Because I want to deny all, the remaining traffic. So all traffic, adding a rule, and this would be matching any IP traffic, source any, destination any, save the rule, and then save the class. And that's your classes. Once the classes are configured, I can assign them to a policy. Now let me create one. Add policy, and let's call that policy camera. And then I can add the rules. So you can see the class names here that I've configured. Again, I have to add a sequence. What I'm going to do is I'm going to permit the DHCP camera IGMP, and I'm going to deny all traffic. So start with DHCP DNS, permit, another sequence, camera permit, and another sequence, IGMP permit, and finally is denying all the other traffic. Okay, save that policy, and then that's your policy. And now what I can do is here I can now select that policy. So that policy now will be used by this enforcement profile. For tunneling traffic, I have to specify the secondary user role. It will be a static user role. So this is the name of the role that is configured on the mobility controller. So that would be UBT camera. You can also see the dynamic role option. When you select this option, you can have the mobility controller download the role from ClearPass. Now, I will cover dynamic user roles in a later video. I can leave the VLAN configuration because with user-based tunneling, the role on the mobility controller is mapped to the designated VLAN. So there's no need to configure any VLANs for the switch. Now let's check out the summary. And let's scroll down to the user role configuration. And as you can see in the user role configuration section, this all looks very familiar. You can see the classes, the policy, and the user role configuration. And this will be the information that is pushed to the switch when the camera authenticates successfully. Now I'm going to save this profile, and I'm going to create another profile for 802.1x, and that will also be a downloadable role enforcement. Let's call it UBT downloadable user role .1x, and the product is an Aruba OS switch. You can see a very similar form here. Now what I can do here is for this 802.1x profile, I already configured some classes, right? So if I go to the classes here, you can also see, or there are already classes here. So for 802.1x, I can use this all traffic class. Okay, so the only thing I need to do for this profile is to add a policy called, well, just give it a name, employee, for example, and I can add this class all traffic and permit that class, and then save the policy. And then what I can do is I can assign that policy there, and for the secondary user role, that would be ubt.1x, and that's really it for the enforcement profile for 802.1x. Again, you can see the user role configuration here, so really straightforward. And let me save this one. Next is the guest profile, and this is the profile that will be pushed to the switch after successful web authentication and port bounce. So for this profile, I want to create a new class. So let me just first create the downloadable user role enforcement, UBT downloadable user role guest. Okay, so I'm going to create a new class for this profile, because what I want for the guest user is allow all traffic except for the services network, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a class, and this class is called guest, and I'm going to add a rule here, and this rule is matching any traffic from any source. Destination would be an IP subnet, and the subnet would be 192.168.0.0/24. So that's your network. Save that rule, and then save the class. And the next is to create a policy for the guest. Let's call it guest, and add some rules. So first rule I'm adding is to allow the DHCP, and another rule 20 to deny the guest traffic. and a third rule to allow all other traffic. So that's all traffic permit. And save it. And then I can assign that policy here to the profile. For the secondary role type, it is UBT guest. So that's the secondary user role that's configured on the mobility controller. Okay, again, look at the summary, looking good, and save that profile. The last profile is used for the captive portal redirection. And let me just create that one. So that would be UBT redirect. And that is a Aruba OS switch profile. And so for that I need to create another two classes. So one that classifies the ClearPass server and one that classifies all HTTP and HTTPS traffic. So let me add those classes. ClearPass first. Add a rule. And so for ClearPass I am matching IP source any, and my destination would be a host, which is the ClearPass server. Save that rule and then save that class. And then create another one which is called captive portal. Let's call it captive portal, and then add two rules here. So one is to allow one is to match HTTP traffic and the other one is to match HTTPS traffic. So 10 match protocol TCP. So HTTP and HTTPS is both TCP. Destination any, my destination port would equal port 80, and the other rule, this is 20, would equal port 443, and then save that class as well. And then next I will be adding the policy. I'll just give it a name, captive portal redirect, and add the rules. So for the captive portal I need to allow the DHCP DNS, and the I also need to allow the ClearPass. And for ClearPass, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do some rate limiting here. So there's some additional parameters I can set. So my rate limit would be 1 meg, and I can set a priority, for example. Okay, so these are things you can also configure. And then the third one is I need to add another rule, which is the captive portal rule. And the captive portal I need to redirect. So whenever I get TCP traffic on port 80 or port 443, I need to redirect that traffic to the captive portal. Okay, and then save the policy, and then what I can do is I can assign that policy here. And then next is to add the captive portal profile. Let's give it a name and the redirection URL. Okay, so that should be good. Save that one, and then I can assign that to the profile. Remember that for the captive portal, I cannot redirect to a tunnel. So traffic for the redirect role is switched locally. So I don't have to specify a secondary role type. However, I do need to specify a VLAN, which is VLAN 100. Okay, let's check out the summary again. can also see it's very similar. You can see the user role here, doing the redirect policy and assigning VLAN 100. Now let me save that profile. So that's it for the profiles. Let's go to the policies. So they are very similar to the policies that we have configured for the local user roles. The main difference is that we have to assign different profiles. So what I will do is I will just copy the local user role policies to, to downloadable user role policies and make those changes. And just let me show you and let me explain to you whilst I go through that configuration. Let me start with the .1x. What I can do is I can copy that policy. So what will happen is that there's a copy here, and then what I have is I'll just change the name to downloadable user role .1x, and then for the rules you can see I have the equals user authenticated and I have the local user role profile assigned now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove that one, and I'm going to add the downloadable, oh that's the wrong one, for UBT, the downloadable user role .1x, and then save it. I can do the same for the macauth. Let me just do the macauth. Let me copy it, and then I've got a copy here, and just go to just change the name to downloadable user role, and then for these conditions I need to change the profiles again. So let me just do that. Edit rule. So this is a local user role camera, remove it, and I want to use the downloadable user role camera. Same for this one, remove the guest one and add the downloadable user role guest, and finally for the redirect role I need to assign the downloadable user role redirect. Okay, and then save that one. For the web auth policy, I don't really need to make any changes, because what I'm doing here, so the enforcement that I'm doing in this policy is UBT port bounce and UBT captive portal expiry, and these are not actions that I'm performing towards the switch. So these are local. Well, actually the port bounce is executed to the switch, but it's not a user role, so that's very generic. But but for the sake of consistency, what I'll do is I'll just make a copy of it, and I'm just gonna rename it so that so that we have a consistent configuration. So, but I said I can use the same conditions here. For the services, I will do a similar thing. It really comes down to service classification, which is already done in the local user role services. So, and I can use those services to to change them to the downloadable user roles instead of using the radius VSA. So I will do the same thing as I did with policies. I will just copy those services to the downloadable user role services. Let me start with the 802.1x. Change that one, and then really the only thing I need to change is the enforcement. What's happening here? Oh, okay, has to be downloadable user role, has to be correct. It's good that ClearPass gives me this message. So that's there. Let's go to the macauth service and do a copy as well. Make it a downloadable user role. So I can keep all the authentication and authorization messages or settings, and then for the enforcement I'm doing the downloadable macauth. And then finally for the web auth service, let's copy that one as well. Downloadable user role, and the enforcement would be the downloadable user role web auth policy. And then next what I have to do is to disable the services that are not relevant anymore. So these are the local user role services, and also I'm going to disable the sudo pbt ones. So I will be sure that the downloadable user role services are triggered. Now let me connect some clients. The 802.1x client and the captive portal client. I've got two cameras connected now. Okay, I'm getting the sign in for the 802.1x. And I'm getting the captive portal page on the other laptop. Okay, let's check out the access tracker. I should get a lot of accepts. Let's go here. I see the camera, the first camera, that's this one. So that's pushing the role, the camera role here, so that's good. I also see the 802.1x role being pushed. And the other thing is, so this is the captive portal. So this is the initial request, the redirect. And then the web authentication, which is successful, which is doing the port bounce. And the third authentication for the captive portal, which is pushing the guest user role. And then there's also a I think it's that one, yeah. So this is the second camera. You can see that it's also pushing the camera role. And there's also another device, I believe it's this one, which is performing the UBT redirect. Now, this device is a phone. So I'm going to use this phone in a minute for configuring a advanced downloadable user role profile. So let me just quickly show you the endpoints. So you've got the VoIP phone here, so I will use that one later on. Now let me show you the switch. Show port access client, and you can see all the good stuff here. So you can see both cameras, the one on top here, the 0066, and the bottom one. I see the guest user with captive portal, and I see the .1x user, and this is the phone for which I will be configuring an advanced user role. And then finally move to the mobility controller. See if I have the 4 clients on the mobility controller, and I have those here as well. You've got the cameras, and you have the guest and the .1x. Let's see if it's doing some load balancing. 159, 158. So it's doing load balancing here for the dynamic segmentation. So that's really cool. Next is the advanced downloadable user profile, downloadable user role profile, which I will be configuring for the IP phone. Again, that's going to be a downloadable role enforcement. Let's call it dir phone, and it's going to be OS switch, and I'm going to set the advanced configuration mode. Okay. So for the for the phone, what I will do is I will assign VLAN 140 as the voice VLAN, and for the IP telephony, I want to keep the traffic local, so I don't want to tunnel any traffic. So the way to configure this is there is this radius vendor specific attribute here. It's called HPE CPPM role, and what I can do is I can enter the script information here. So I'll just copy some information. I'm just pasting it in. Now, and this is really the tricky part. So the syntax of this value has to be 100% correct. So if there's a typo or a wrong sequence, the role will not be pushed. And you will see that in the debugging screen on the switch anyway. But so it's really very important that the syntax is correct. What you can do is you can kind of you can take the information from another downloadable user role, like a standard user role, and copy and paste that in and then make some minor changes. So I mean, there are some easy ways to get around it. But thing is, here you can see this this role scriptlet. It's basically a class that allows all traffic, a policy that to which the class is assigned, and then a user role name, and I am assigning the policy phone, and I'm assigning VLAN ID 140. Yeah, let's save that one. So that's the IP phone profile. And then next, what I need to do is go to the policies and go to the MacAuth policy. Now, what we already have is a similar condition here. So what I can do is, let me just first check the endpoints, because I want to see. So this is the phone, and it belongs to the device category VoIP phone. So I can classify on that VoIP phone device category. So moving back to policies, going to the downloadable user role MacAuth. What I'll do is I'll just add a rule with the condition. So checking the endpoints repository, the category equals was it VoIP phone? It's all the way down. And then what I can do is, the other thing, tips role equals user authenticated, and then I can assign the phone downloadable user role profile. Okay. The other thing I need to do is, because this the role sequence is important. So this is rule 3 or condition 3 is the very generic one. This is a very specific one. So I have to move up this role. I will just move it up to under the network camera condition, and then save it. Now let me just reconnect the phone and see what happens. Okay, so reconnecting, you can see it, and I'm connecting again. So this takes a wee while, because you can see that power has to be applied to the phone, and so this would take about a minute to power on. Okay, and actually one thing I forgot to do is, of course, I need to configure VLAN 140 on the switch. That VLAN has to exist, right? So tagged 8, and you can already see that VLAN 140 is enabled. So it's just in time before the phone powered up. Let me check out the access tracker now. That's the phone. Let's see what role it's pushing. Yes, so it's now pushing the DIR phone profile, which is good. And let me so that's connected to port 4. And actually what I have behind the phone, I have a I have the 802.1x client connected, so I need to authenticate that one as well. Again, because that one was powered off again. Okay, and let me just do a show port access client for detail. Get all the stuff there. You can see my client is authenticated using 802.1x, and there's another authentication MAC based, which is the phone, and that is assigned to VLAN 140. Now, of course, because the phone is not using any tunneling, so the traffic stays local, you don't see any clients on the mobility controller dashboard. So you know that makes sense. And that's it for now. Keep on the lookout for more great stuff to come on dynamic segmentation. Thank you for watching. Please give a thumbs up if you like the video, and if you have any suggestions, ideas or questions, please let us know, and subscribe to this ABC networking channel. It's all great stuff. Hope to see you soon again, and have a great day.